This is the all-new Specialized Tarmac SL7, the latest, greatest race bike from one of the most influential bike makers in the world. This new Tarmac marks a couple of significant steps for Specialized. The first is, it's RIP Venge. There is no more Venge in the range from here on out. The Tarmac takes on the role of both the lightweight climber's bike and the aero race bike because, as Specialized puts it, you don't want to be swapping bikes according to what ride you're doing, you want one bike to rule them all. The other key change is that it's disc only from here on out. If you want a rim brake Tarmac, you're going to have to get last year's SL6 because that was the last of its kind. As you can see from looking at it, this new bike owes a lot to both the SL6 Tarmac and the current Venge. Everything is aero profiled. Specialized has put a huge amount of work into making this bike more slippery, and that's meant updates specifically to the seat tube, the seat stays, the head tube and the fork legs. As a complete package, Specialized was really keen to make this bike as light as the outgoing Tarmac disc, but as aero as it possibly could be. The result of all this work is that Specialized claims that this bike, as a complete package, is 45 seconds faster over 40 kilometers than the old Tarmac SL6. Specialized claim that despite all of those aero advantages, this frame weighs the same as the outgoing Tarmac disc, 800 grams. That's compared to 960 grams claimed for the Venge. Now, those weights are for painted size 56 frames, apparently. I'm sure some of you will be saying, but isn't the Trekker Monda sub 700 grams? No, it's not, because that is an unpainted weight. There is no standard weight away frame, so you have to understand there's a bit of give and take here. Specialized is a little bit vague about how aero this bike is compared to the Venge. I think it's safe to say it is slightly less aero than a Venge, but it's very, very close. Unfortunately, we do not have the means to test that precisely, so we're going to have to take Specialized's word for it. Before I talk about how this remarkable bike rides, I'm going to take you through some details of the frame set and the build, and at the end I'll also give you an overview of the whole new Tarmac range. So, this specific bike is the S-Works model. S-Works is Specialized best stuff. Think of it as like BMW M or Mercedes AMG. This model, the top spec S-Works, gets 12R carbon, the best stuff. The lower models get 10R carbon. Specialized doesn't divulge precise details of what the differences are between the layups, but basically the 10R carbon is supposed to be about 120 grams heavier for a frame. When Specialized designed the SL7, they put loads of work into aerodynamics, and it's obvious from looking at this bike that pretty well every part of the frame set and the cockpit and the seat post has aero features, and the seat tube has a cutout that looks very much like the one on the Venge. Dropped seat stays are almost a given on a bike like this these days, it seems, although some, like Trek's newer Monda, don't have dropped seat stays. A lot of manufacturers like this design feature because it's an easy way to add rear-end lateral stiffness with some vertical compliance, and also there may be an aero advantage depending on how they go about it. One of the most striking visual changes to the Tarmac is in its new cable routing and the way it's integrated with this cockpit. Previously, there were cables on display on the Tarmac. With this new setup, you can just see a little bit under the stem, but basically they're totally hidden. Now, Specialized has tried to make this as practical as is feasible given the limitations of hiding everything, so you can still adjust the stack, for instance, without having to totally recable everything. If you want to replace your top headset bearing, you are going to have to disconnect hydraulic lines, but that is true of a significant number of the aero bikes that have come out in recent years. This rather tidy headset setup looks like it makes adjustments very difficult, but you can lower the bars without cutting your steer on this system. There's a different cover that goes on this so that you can put a conventional round spacer on top, and then later on, if you commit to that stack height, you can then cut the steerer and put the nice neat cover back on. Another cool feature of this cockpit is the integrated computer mount, which comes with a selection of adapters for all the major computers on the market, and also lets you attach accessories to the underside like lights or, as I did, a GoPro. From a rider's perspective, the most noticeable thing is just how massively wide the tops of these bars are. They look super cool, and I'm sure they're super aero as well. You may not like them if you prefer to be able to wrap your fingers around like you would on a conventional round bar, but that's a matter of personal taste. They do look incredible. One nice thing about this setup is that the stem clamp is completely standard, so you're not locked into using these bars only. It's not like having a totally integrated one-piece aero cockpit. Specialized is very on trend with some of the specs here. This bike comes with 26mm tyres, but it has room for anything up to a 32, which just a few years ago would have been completely crazy on a race bike. The frame is also designed so that you can run it one by if you want. You can remove the front derailleur mount and put a nice neat cover in its place. And actually, Specialized is going to offer a one by model as standard. Another area where Specialized is achingly on trend is the bottom bracket. Now, there's been a lot of backlash against press fits. They can work very well, but sometimes they don't, and they're not the easiest things to live with from a home mechanic's point of view. This bike has a conventional BSA threaded bottom bracket, which means easy compatibility and easy maintenance. This specific bike is one of two S-Works models. The other one has Shimano Dura-Ace Di2. This one has a full SRAM red E-tap axis 12-speed group set. This is the Quark power meter version of the red crank, so that's one thing you don't need to change for serious training. And speaking of seriousness, Specialized offers a -12° stem as an alternative to the -6° one that's fitted as standard. The wheels on this bike are, as you would expect, very aerodynamic, deep, whooshy carbon ones. They are Roval Rapide CLX carbon clinchers with a very modern 21mm internal width. Now, they're pretty deep, as you can see. The rear is 60mm, the front is 51mm, and they actually have differing external widths, which is interesting. That's an aerodynamic thing. The front is 35mm wide at its widest point, which is absolutely massive, and it means that the rim is significantly wider than the tyre, which is great for aerodynamics. The rear, on the other hand, is 30.7mm wide, and I think that might be because it's easier to hide the rim behind the seat tube by making it a little bit narrower. Claimed weight for these wheels is a really remarkably low 1400 grams. Bear in mind, these are properly deep aero wheels. Now that's all great and very, very modern, but one thing that is a little bit surprising is they're not tubeless. Last year, Specialized made a big thing with the launch of its Turbo Rapid Air tubeless tyre about how tubeless was the future, tubeless was faster, and it really seemed like, as a brand, they were going to move towards tubeless being the thing. So they've gone and launched their all-new best of everything race bike, and it hasn't got tubeless wheels. I did ask Specialized to explain this curious decision, and they were a tiny bit vague about it. The sense that I get from them is that the general direction of travel is still towards tubeless, but at the moment, to hit their performance goals, both weight and aerodynamics, they felt that a conventional clincher rim was more appropriate. Make of that what you will. To top off this pretty exceptional build, Specialized has fitted its fan favourite power saddle, which a great many of you absolutely seem to love. It seems to work for loads of you. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that well for me, but saddles are such a personal thing that's highly subjective and means nothing. I'm sure this choice will make many of you very happy. With all these lovely components, this fancy wireless group set, but with disc brakes and very light deep section carbon wheels, this bike, a size 54, weighs 7 kilos on our scales. It's not actually the lightest version of this bike. Specialized says that the Dura-Ace Di2 version is 6.7 kilos for a 56. That is, of course, without pedals. but it is a number that's under the UCI weight limit. When you add bottle cages, pedals and other accessories, it's fair to say that most bikes will probably come just over 7 kilos. So it's shiny, it's fancy, it's high tech, but what you really want to know is, how does this bike ride? Now, I don't subscribe to this idea that bikes have personalities. They're inanimate objects, they have no agency of their own. However, if this bike had a personality, it would be egging you to ride as fast as possible all the time, because it just has, I don't know what you want to call it, maybe big head tube energy. It wants you to try hard. I've ridden this bike for a few hours and I found that I didn't want to cruise along on it. It's hard to pin it down to like one singular aspect of the build. Obviously having deep section aero wheels gives you that whooshy carbon soundtrack. That's a major motivator. But it isn't just that, it's a very stiff bike, as you would hope, massively efficient power transfer, and it is also quite a firm ride. It has that kind of super race bike, hard-edged efficiency, but at the same time it carries its power so beautifully. I've ridden 3 generations of Tarmac now, and what I've always loved about them is the way they combine that sort of brutish efficiency with a kind of surgical precision. There really is no better bike for throwing down a hill, leaning into corners, just pushing as hard as you can, sprinting out of the saddle. It does everything so well, and at the same time, it's got that underlying smoothness of a really good quality carbon frame. Comfort is always a tricky thing to talk about because your expectation plays a role as well. This is a pure race bike, so you don't expect it to be a truly cosseting ride. And it isn't a bike that you would choose for off-road diversions onto gravel because it's just not that well suited to it. Also, there are a great many variables in comfort. Specialized specs this with 26mm tyres, which aren't that wide compared to the ones that many of us are now running on particularly endurance bikes or kind of all roadie type things. On the other hand, these super wide rims do get quite a lot of volume out of those tyres, and even though they're not tubeless, you can run them at fairly low pressures. Now I'm very light, I weigh 53 kilos, but I'm running these tyres somewhere in the 60 something PSI area, which for a 26 sounds really low, but works well. I've said this bike is quite firm, and it is. If you ride it down a potholed lane, you will feel the road, there's no question. I'm running a Specialized Roubaix as a long-termer at the moment, which has the future shock at the front and a massive amount of compliance built into the rear end because the seat post can flex a huge amount. And the difference is pretty stark between the two bikes. I'm not criticising the SL7 for being uncomfortable, but if you're thinking of buying a bike like this, don't go into it thinking this is going to be super squishy, because it's not. It is unapologetically a race bike. Incidentally, you could of course add some more comfort by taking advantage of the tyre clearance that we mentioned earlier, or also switching to a tubeless wheel set and running your tyres at lower pressures. Of course, a big part of the Tarmac's racy personality is its geometry. The reach on this size 54 bike is 387mm and the stack is 534mm. I'm a 31-year-old man who's already not as flexible as he used to be, and personally, I don't actually want the bars any lower than they are right now, but I'm sure that many of you will want that super pro look. It goes without saying that this is not a cheap bicycle. This particular model, the S-Works with SRAM Red ETAP axis, costs £10,499 in the UK. The Shimano Dura-Ace Di2 version is the exact same price. That's more than the combined value of the two cars that our videographer Felix and I drove here in today, and the camera that he's filming this on right now. The other way you can get an S-Works is to buy a frame set, which costs £3,750. But of course, there are cheaper ways to get your hands on an SL7 Tarmac. I'm going to take you through the range, and in time-honoured tradition, because I can't keep that many numbers in my head at once, I'm going to refer to my notes. The cheapest Tarmac SL7 is the Expert model, which costs £4,750 and has a Shimano Ultegra Di2 group set. It's got alloy wheels and it weighs a claimed 7.65 kilograms. Not too shabby. Remember that the Expert gets the cheaper, slightly lower grade FACT 10R carbon. The next model up is the Pro. There are two Pros. There's one with Ultegra Di2, which costs £6,500, and there's the 1x Force ETAP Axis version that costs £6,750. Again, the Pro model has FACT 10R, not the top spec, FACT 12R carbon. There's nothing between the Pro models and the S-Works, so there's a really large jump in price to go from one to the other. I suspect that many of you will want a Pro model and maybe make selective upgrades to bring it up to spec. But if you want to have the best, obviously it's going to have to be the S-Works. Right now, there isn't what you might call a cheap SL7. However, the old SL6 tarmac is sticking around as a model for now. The cheapest model is the SL6 Sport with a Shimano 105 hydraulic group set, and that costs £2,500. Finally, the Tarmac SL6 Comp with Ultegra is £3,250. So there you have it. The Tarmac SL7 is a very serious bicycle for very serious cyclists. Would you sell a kidney for this bike? Would you remortgage your house? I'm sure lots of you think that spending this much money on a bicycle is a sign of some form of insanity, and maybe you're right, but there's no question this is a pretty exceptional machine. Let us know what you think of the Tarmac SL7, and please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that little bell icon so that you get notified about all of our videos.